The Venator-class Star Destroyer won the Clone Wars for the Republic, and the rebellion that swore to restore that Republic never flew one. The Alliance was desperate for capital ships, yet not a single Venator appeared at Scarif, Yavin, or Endor, and the reasons went far deeper than cruise size or spare parts. During the Clone Wars, the Venator carried Jedi generals, launched hundreds of starfighters from its dorsal flight deck, and fought across the galaxy from the core to the Outer Rim. Its 8 heavy turbo laser turrets could track targets at long range with precision, then rotate for close-range combat in 3 seconds flat. It was a carrier and a battleship rolled into one, crewed by some of the best clone troopers ever grown on Kamino. The Venator-class Star Destroyer earned the nickname Jedi Cruiser because Republic generals used it as their personal flagship throughout the conflict. It had a dual bridge, one side for standard ship command, and the other dedicated entirely to starfighter operations. So a Jedi could coordinate a fleet from orbit, while clone pilots launched V-Wings and ARC-170s below. The Venator was the ship that carried Anakin Skywalker into battle above Coruscant, that held the line during the Outer Rim sieges when the Republic pushed into Separatist territory, system by system. At 1,137 meters long, with a crew of 7,400 clones, it was fast enough to run down blockade runners and tough enough to slug it out with Separatist battleships at close range. For 3 years, it was the spine of the Republic Navy. Then the Republic fell, the Jedi were hunted, and the Venator became a relic. The Empire hadn't scrapped every Venator warship. A few survived as training ships, orbital platforms, or salvage. The Alliance desperately needed capital ships, and the Venator was a war-proven design from the Republic they wanted to restore. Yet the rebellion never fielded a single Venator. When Mon Mothma formally declared open rebellion against the Empire, she didn't call her movement the Second Republic or the Republic Reborn. She called it the Alliance to Restore the Republic, a careful and specific name. The Chandrilan leader's declaration was deliberately framed in legal language. It named Palpatine's crimes and called his rule unconstitutional. Most importantly, it positioned the rebellion not as a return to the old system, but as something new. Something that would build a better version of what came before. Mon Mothma's decision was no accident. She named her movement the Alliance to Restore the Republic specifically, not a shadow government or a parliament in exile, because anything that looked like a rival government would only invite comparison to the Confederacy of Independent Systems, the separatist movement that had its own Senate and still lost everything. A shadow republic wouldn't look intimidating enough. It would carry the stink of a system that had already failed before. The Venator was the most visible symbol of that failure. Venators were the ships that had fought the Clone Wars for 3 years. They defended Coruscant and carried Jedi generals into battle. When Palpatine executed Order 66, when the Republic died from within, the Venators were right there. They didn't stop. They couldn't stop. In the eyes of a movement trying to build legitimacy across a skeptical galaxy, flying a Venator into battle would have sent the wrong message entirely. The Alliance understood this deeply, since the rebel leadership ran a formal propaganda bureau tasked with shaping how the galaxy saw their movement. Under January Bith, the bureau's chief, the Galactic Civil War was not a battle for territory. It was a struggle for hearts and minds. In that struggle, every ship the rebellion flew was a visual statement. A Venator over a liberated world wouldn't signal liberation. It would signal a return to the system that had already crumbled. The rebels needed to look like something new, not like the Republic's ghost. So instead, the rebellion built its image around the individual starfighter pilot. After the Battle of Yavin, rebel messaging celebrated these pilots as everyday heroes, ordinary people flying older ships against impossible odds. The pilots became the rebellion's identity, and it had no room for a kilometer-long relic of a war everyone wanted to forget. Symbolism alone, however, doesn't explain why the Venator vanished from consideration. Even if the rebels had been willing to overlook the political baggage, they would have to run straight into a wall of logistics. The Venator's main reactor consumed up to 40,000 tons of fuel per second at maximum power, a number that's even hard to picture. The rebellion was an organization that tracked the loss of a single Y-Wing down to its 130,000 credit value. After a skirmish in the Recluse's Nebula, General Bacchum Graphis of Ordnance and Supply sent Mon Mothma a detailed accounting, ship by ship, credit by credit. At their current rate of losses, the Alliance would exhaust its fleet within 18 months. The Alliance wasn't debating what ships to add. It was calculating how many months it had left before its fleet fell apart entirely. Cinnabar's Infonet, a galactic information broker, put the rebellion's chances after Yavin in blunt terms: unreliable credit flows, shaky supply chains, a military that wasn't worth much, and a coalition that could fracture at any moment. Now imagine dropping a Venator into that equation: 7,400 crew members just for basic operations, separate bridge teams for Helm and Starfighter Command, specialized gun crews for 8 turbo laser turrets, fuel reserves that would drain faster than any smuggler network could replenish them, plus spare parts from a supply chain that no longer existed because the factories that once built Venator components had been converted to produce Imperial Star Destroyers. On top of all of that, the Venator's greatest advantage was also its greatest liability. The armored bow doors of the Venator's flight deck opened and closed slowly, leaving the ship exposed during launch operations. And because of this flaw, engineers had to install power-hungry deflector shielding around the deck entrance. Every time a Venator launched fighters, it drained energy from its own defenses. Republic-era engineers compensated with dedicated power teams. The Rebels had nothing comparable. The personnel problem ran even deeper than numbers. The Venator was a complex ship designed for the disciplined, hierarchical structure of the Republic Navy and its clone troopers, which were purpose-built for the job. The Empire quietly phased them out and replaced them with volunteer recruits once the war ended. A detail from propaganda: the people who actually knew how to run a Venator from the inside were gone. Any Rebel crew would have been learning from scratch on a ship built for someone else. Admiral Akbar recognized this clearly. In his margin notes on the Imperial Handbook, the Super Star Destroyer specifications made the problem clear. Even if the Alliance captured one of those massive ships, it wouldn't have enough people to crew it. The same logic applied at smaller scales. The Venator's crew requirement of 7,400 was far beyond what the Alliance could staff without gutting other ships and bases of essential personnel. But a Venator didn't just need thousands of crew members. It needed thousands of trained specialists. Running a Venator's turbo laser batteries required specialized gunnery teams trained on the DBY-827 turret system. Its bridge demanded officers who understood the split between helm operations and fighter coordination. The Rebels had plenty of brave pilots and dedicated soldiers. What they didn't have was the kind of rigid, structured naval hierarchy that a ship like the Venator demanded. When General Kriegsmarine later proposed hijacking the Star Destroyer Harbinger, it was an unprecedented plan. The Alliance's first attempt to operate any Star Destroyer-class vessel. The mission was treated as a reach, not as routine. Meanwhile, the Empire was hunting the Rebellion with tools it couldn't outrun. The Empire's surveillance ran in layers. The ISB ran system-wide monitoring across HoloNet and subspace channels. Imperial Complink intercepted communications galaxy-wide, flagging specific words and phrases. Viper probe droids launched by the hundreds from Star Destroyers could detect energy signatures across entire systems with their multi-spectrum scanning packages. The Rebels responded by making themselves as small and as quiet as possible. General Riken's security protocols at Echo Base banned all outgoing and incoming communications for any reason. Ship traffic had to follow randomized jump schedules set by High Command. Any vessel arriving with the wrong approach vector was treated as a hostile threat. The Rebellion chose its hideouts with extreme care. Hoth was selected as a base specifically because its climate was so harsh that it would go unnoticed. Scouting reports confirmed it wasn't listed on official navigation charts. Even so, it wasn't enough. A single Viper probe droid landed on Hoth's surface, detected the base's energy signature, and transmitted its location to the Executor. The Empire found them on a frozen rock that didn't appear on any map. A Venator would have made that problem catastrophically worse. At 1,137 meters long, its reactor signature would light up Imperial sensors across a sector. The Rebellion's entire strategy depended on staying invisible, and the Venator was the loudest ship in any system it entered. Even if the Rebels could somehow hide one, they couldn't afford to lose one. The Rebellion didn't operate like a navy, it operated like an insurgency. And the most important rule of an insurgency is redundancy. You spread your power out so that no single loss can end the fight. At the height of the Galactic Civil War, the Alliance's space-going forces total roughly 7% of the Imperial fleet's strength, with troop numbers around 3.5% of the Empire's military. The Rebellion's numbers may sound tiny, but they worked because the Alliance devoted nearly all of it to offensive operations rather than holding territory. The fleet was designed to scatter, regroup, and strike again. Consider the Fleet Admiral Raddus' scramble for the Battle of Scarif. His force included the Profundity as flagship, 2 Nebulon B frigates, a handful of Hammerhead corvettes, Dornian gunships, Corellian corvettes, 12 medium transports, and miscellaneous freighters. The strike force changed the course of the war by securing the Death Star plans, yet not a single ship in it was irreplaceable. Raddus lost the Profundity at Scarif, and the Alliance survived because the fleet was built around the idea that any piece could be sacrificed without killing the whole. After Hoth, when the Empire overran Echo Base and scattered the rebels, Mothma released a public statement claiming the Alliance fleet was as strong as ever, because the fleet was spread across the galaxy with no single concentration point. Mothma's statement was only possible if the rebels had anchored their strategy around a Venator carrying thousands of crew and hundreds of fighters. Hoth wouldn't have been a setback, it would have been the end, because destroying a single Venator would have meant eliminating a significant percentage of the Alliance's total combat power in one engagement. The Empire would have hunted that ship relentlessly, devoting entire task forces to tracking it down. The Rebellion couldn't ever take that gamble. Every practical argument against the Venator pointed to the same conclusion. The Rebellion needed a ship that wouldn't drain them too much when lost. If you want to see more videos like this one, a quick subscribe means you'll always be the first to know. The answer to the Rebellion's problem had already arrived from the oceans of Mon Cala. Mon Calamari star cruisers started as life exploration vessels, deep-range craft designed for long voyages into uncharted space. They already carried military-grade shields and small starfighter wings. When the Empire occupied Mon Cala, the shipyard workers launched a secret rearmament program, building luxury cruise liners for Imperial use while designing every component as a prototype for future warships. Moff Tarkin himself allowed these liners to be built. He admired the elegant hull forms of the MC-80 design and permitted the shipyards to produce variants for luxury cruise companies. He had no idea the shipwrights were embedding warship technology into every deck. Pinpoint targeting computers were hidden as sports lasers on one liner's promenade deck. An advanced Class 1 hyperdrive was installed aboard another. When the Mon Calamari resistance finally threw off Imperial rule, those cruise liners were rapidly converted to combat vessels. Viewports were plated over, turbo laser batteries were bolted on. However, this had been the plan all along. The result was something the Venator never tried to be, a survivability-first warship. MC-80 cruisers lacked the raw firepower of Imperial Star Destroyers, but their shields were stronger and their targeting computers were more precise. In long-range duels, they could outlast opponents that outgunned them. One set of margin notes in the Rebel files captured the philosophy perfectly. Imperial Star Destroyers held at least 33% advantage in turbo laser power over the MC-80. Mon Calamari ships were well-rounded through every type of engagement, so the gap didn't matter. The MC-80 did everything the Venator did with half the crew and none of the risk. It served as command ship, carrier, and capital combatant at once, with a design built for endurance rather than aggressive fleet operations. It didn't require a separate bridge team to coordinate fighters, and didn't expose itself every time it launched a squadron. It was also simpler, tougher, and built for exactly the kind of war the rebels were fighting. A war where you absorb punishment, keep your command structure alive, and let your starfighters do the killing. Where the Venator was a hammer, the MC-80 was a shield, and the Rebellion needed shields far more than it needed hammers. In Legends, the disaster at Deep Space Besh, an Imperial ambush that nearly destroyed the entire Rebel fleet, forced the Mon Calamari to donate their whole naval strength to the Alliance. The donation wasn't a token gesture, it was the transfer of an entire planetary navy, exploration cruisers, and converted warships alike, led by Admiral Akbar himself. The Mon Calamari Admiral rebuilt the fleet from near destruction around these ships and their doctrine, retaining commanders and enforcing a new level of discipline that attracted defectors from the Imperial Navy who had previously dismissed the Rebellion as a disorganized rabble. By the time the Alliance could have even considered fielding a Venator, the fleet was already built around a completely different philosophy. There was simply no gap left for the Venator to fill. The Alliance spent its credit on things that actually won battles. The B-Wing heavy fighter, developed in secret at the Roche asteroids under Akbar's supervision, gave the rebels a dedicated anti-capital ship bomber with shields and a hyperdrive, a weapon that could threaten Star Destroyers without needing a carrier to haul it into position. By the Battle of Endor, the Mon Calamari shipyards had produced 8 new heavy cruisers and nearly 50 escort vessels while simultaneously building starfighters. A single Venator refit would have consumed the resources needed to build several of those frigates and escorts, the very vessels that would form the backbone of the Endor fleet. The rebels chose breadth over concentration. A Venator couldn't execute that kind of strategy. The dispersal was the strategy. The rebels also weren't fighting the same war the Venator was built for. The Clone Wars was a symmetric conflict, 2 massive militaries clashing across open space. The Venator was designed for that kind of fight, built to chase down enemy fleets, launch waves of short-range interceptors, and slug it out at the battle line. The Galactic Civil War was the opposite. For General Jan Dodonna, one of the Alliance's founding military leaders, hyperdrive-capable starfighters could break the Empire's control of space all by themselves. In Legends, he proved it by using Y-Wings to defeat Star Destroyer fleets at Deneb and Tarawa, relying on hidden bases and converted cargo haulers for support. His fighters appeared without warning, hit hard, and vanished before the Empire could respond. Dodonna's success became the template for the entire Alliance. Finding targets for starfighter raids became the top priority of Alliance intelligence, while support and supply commands focused on keeping his squadrons fueled and armed. Starfighters weren't just one part of the rebel military, they became its primary combat force. The X-Wing took that concept even further. Its nose housed a suite of Fabritech sensors originally designed for larger ships, giving it the ability to operate independently without needing a capital ship for targeting data or flight control. Combined with proton torpedo launchers and a hyperdrive that let it jump into and out of combat on its own, the X-Wing was a self-contained strike unit. It didn't need a carrier. The Venator existed because Clone Wars starfighters like the V-Wing couldn't operate without a mothership. The X-Wing eliminated that dependency entirely. Once every rebel fighter could jump to hyperspace, navigate on its own sensors, and hit capital ships with torpedoes, the entire reason to build a dedicated carrier quietly disappeared. The Venator had been the answer to a problem the Rebellion no longer had. Meanwhile, Mothma rejected the kind of warfare the Venator was built to support. When some Alliance leaders pushed to reclaim and hold territory, the Chandrilan leaders' opposition was absolute. For Mothma, holding territory would lead to another version of the Outer Rim sieges, exactly the kind of grinding, attrition-heavy combat where Venators had earned their reputation. Fighting the Empire on those terms was futile. The Republic had tried symmetric warfare against Palpatine's forces, and the Republic had lost. The Rebellion had to be faster, lighter, and smarter, or it would share the same fate. Even the Empire had reached the same conclusion about the Venator years earlier. The New Order transformed the Republic Navy from the inside out. Sleek, Imperial Star Destroyers replaced what the handbook calls the scarred battle boats of the Clone Wars. The Empire didn't retire the Venator with respect or ceremony. It treated the ship as an outdated relic from a messier era, a reminder of a war the Empire wanted the galaxy to forget. Newer Star Destroyer designs scrapped the Venator's carrier layout entirely. They were built around more powerful reactors, heavier armor, and stronger shields. The carrier concept gave way to the battleship concept. TIE fighters, cheap and disposable, launched from a smaller ventral hangar and served as escorts rather than the main weapon. In Star Wars propaganda, the flaws in TIE designs were deliberately preserved so that the fighters would remain dependent on capital ships. No hyperdrive, no shields, no life support. The Empire wanted its pilots leashed to their Star Destroyers, unable to desert, unable to operate independently, always dependent on the capital ship above them. The Rebellion invested in the exact opposite, making each fighter self-sufficient, giving every pilot the tools to fight, survive, and escape on their own. The divergence tells the whole story. In the early years after the Clone Wars, Admiral Yularen still deployed Venators alongside newer warships during Outer Rim campaigns. But within a decade, Kuat Drive Yards was retooling its production lines to build Imperial-class Star Destroyers exclusively. The shipyards that had once produced Venators were converted to accommodate the ISD's larger frame, meaning the infrastructure to manufacture Venator-specific components was steadily dismantled. In General Kraken's fleet report, the ISD was already rapidly outpacing Venator production. By the Endor era, the most notable surviving Venator served as the Venators Flight Academy, a floating school for Imperial pilots. The warship that once carried Jedi generals had become a classroom. The Empire, with all its resources, had decided the Venator wasn't worth keeping on the front line, so the rebellion would not have invested its last credits in a ship the enemy had already outgrown. The rebels had simply moved beyond the Venator ships. The fleet that assembled above Sullust before the Battle of Endor was proof. Ackbar drew together MC-80 Star Cruisers for command and capital engagement, Nebulon B frigates for escort and medical transport, CR-90 corvettes for fast attack, Brahatak gunships for bombardment, GR-75 transports for resupply, and Pelta-class frigates for communications. Mixed squadrons of A-wings, B-wings, X-wings, and Y-wings flew around them. Every ship had a role. Every fighter was hyperdrive capable. Lando Calrissian's contribution made the fleet even scrappier. A letter to Ackbar in the Rebel files listed Corellian gunships from Alderaanian exiles, X-4 gunships pulled from a mining guild patrol near Kessel, and aftermarket YT freighters, crews included. The Endor fleet was built from whatever its people could beg, borrow, or steal, and together it was enough to take on the most powerful military force in galactic history. Ackbar made one more decision that showed how far the Alliance had come. Rather than grouping fighters into single-type squadrons the way the Republic had done, the Admiral ordered mixed squadrons, blending different fighter types to handle unpredictable situations. Mixed squadrons would better prepare the fleet for an uncertain battlefield. The Republic had fought with rigid structure, centralized command, and massive carrier operations. The Rebellion fought with flexibility, dispersion, and trust in the individual pilot. There was no place in that fleet for a Venator because the Alliance was building a military meant to win the war, not to exist after it. Every element of the Endor fleet reflected that lesson, from the MC-80s absorbing turbolaser fire at the front to the starfighters threading through the superstructure to hit the reactor core. Mothma herself recorded the philosophy behind this in a private journal entry kept in the Rebel files. Mothma never wanted to build a military machine. Deadly force and the urgency of war were exactly how Palpatine had achieved dictatorship. When victory came, the Alliance could not maintain a centralized military. Doing so would only create the conditions for another tyranny. A Venator with its massive crew and concentrated firepower was the embodiment of the centralized military power Mothma feared. The fleet she helped build instead was designed to be dismantled the moment the war ended, a military that carried its own expiration date, built by people who wanted to make sure they never had to fight again. Together, that fleet of donated ships and volunteer crews took down the second Death Star and ended the Emperor's reign. The ship's disappearance had nothing to do with obsolescence. It happened because the Republic died with it. But the Republic's fall wasn't as clean as the Empire wanted the galaxy to remember. So watch this video to find out.